We talked about the miller a little bit the last class. What's one thing you can tell me about the miller? Yes.
He weighed 224 pounds.
He weighed 224 pounds.
He's really brawny and buff.
Yeah, he's buff.
He liked wrestling.
He liked wrestling.
He runs into doors with his head.
Yes. And he says he can knock them down or tear them off their hinges. What else?
His beard shaped like a spade and he's red.
Yeah, red beard shaped like a spade. What's the one? Yeah.
He plays the bagpipes.
He plays the bagpipes. That's a good one.
His nostrils are like black.
Yeah, isn't that gross? One other thing that kind of got to me, John.
He cheats people out of their grain.
Yeah.
Okay, he cheats people. No one's mentioning that gross wart on his lips.
Oh, yeah.
With red bristly hairs growing out of it. Now, he's a real trip, isn't he? I think you hit everything. He was dishonest. He played the bagpipes. He was, I wouldn't want to argue with him because he'd go right to physical cure for his argument, I'm sure. Now we're going to talk about the Manciple. Let's read through it. And it says, the Manciple came from the inner temple. All caterers might follow his example in buying victuals. Okay, so what's the inner temple? I'm not sure what he means by that, but the Manciple is a buyer of provisions. And he is, it says everybody should follow his example when he buys food. He was never rash, whether he bought on credit or paid cash. He used to watch the market most precisely. Now this is the food market, not the market we think of. And go in first, and so he did quite nicely. Now isn't it a marvel of God's grace that a literate fellow can outpace the wisdom of a heap of learned men? His masters, he had more than 30 then, all versed in the abstrusest legal knowledge, could have produced a dozen from their college, fit to be stewards in land and rents and gain. This is pretty clear, I think. To any peer in England you could name. So he had 30 bosses over him that he fed. And it says that they were all really great and they could, serve anywhere. And these peers of England, these lawyers, could show him how to live on what he had debt-free. Unless, of course, the peer were mad. Or to be as frugal as he might desire. And they were fit to help about the shire in any legal case there was to try. And yet this Manciple could wipe their eye. He was smarter than all of them. That's what it meant, wipe his eye. So he could beat them all. So here he was. His job was buying provisions and food for these lawyers, and yet he was smarter than all of them, according to Chaucer here. So he was frugal and careful with how he spent the money, and he had 30 bosses, and he was brighter than them all. Now the Reeve is the one that I started to tell you about, and I would hate to have him for a boss. I don't know, it might be just me, but, well, let me just read it to you. He was old and strict and thin and controlling. His beard was shaven closely. His hair came abruptly to a stop above his ears, like, a bowl haircut. He was docked on top, just like the priest in front. His legs were lean, like sticks they were. No calves were to be seen. That's really skinny legs. He kept his bins and garners, his storage places, very clean and neat. And no auditor could get him for anything because he was so precise about everything he did. He could just tell by watching whether drought or rain was coming and what yield he might expect from his grain at that year. His master's sheep, animals, hens, pigs, horses, dairies, all the cattle pens were wholly trusted to his government. So his boss, he was the overseer of the estate. And he was under contract to present the accounts right from his master's earliest years. No one had ever caught him in arrears behind in his payments. No bailiff, serf, or herdsman dared to complain. He knew every trick. Feared like the plague he was by those beneath him. What does that mean? Everyone who worked for him was afraid of him. He had a lovely dwelling house up on the heath, but the people that worked for him were scared to death of him. We already know he was very strict and very precise. So if you were not see, I'd have trouble because, I don't know about you, but I'm not the strict, precise type sometimes. And this guy wouldn't like me very well, right? His lovely dwelling had green trees all around it and beautiful grass. He was better at bargaining than his lord, and he had grown rich and tucked away a store of treasure. Yet out of his treasure, what he bought was gifts to please his lord, to earn his thanks, and even coats and hoods. Now see, that's funny because he'd buy gifts for his lord to get approval and to get thanks, and sometimes his lord would give him coats or nice hoods. He could have just bought that, but he preferred this method. When young, he learned a useful trade, and still he was a first-rate carpenter. He rode a dapple gray stallion named Scott. He wore an overcoat, kind of blue and long. He had a rusty blade slung at his side. He came, as I heard tell, from Norfolk, near a place called Baldeswell. His coat was tucked under his belt and splayed. What does that mean? So if you have a coat and you put a belt over it, nice and tight, then the coat splays out like this at the bottom. You know, you can kind of spread it out so it goes like this around the bottom. So his coat was splayed out. He was so skinny, and so his belt was probably pulled pretty tight. He rode behind at the back of the cavalcade. Now, just from this, he paid little attention to his fighting gear, obviously, because he had a rusty blade, but what about everything else to do with his trade? The animal pens and the barns and the storage bins and all that. How was he with that?
He's a really hard worker.
Yes, and exact, precise. Now, he didn't do this work. He demanded from the workers that it be that way. He was the overseer. So that means if I was working in the, with the cattle or something, and he came in and felt that something wasn't right, he'd jump on my case and make me do it. So you get the feeling when it says that his employees feared him like the plague. When they'd see him coming, they'd go, uh-oh. And it's like scurrying around trying to straighten everything they could see at the last minute. So he was very detailed about his work. What did he do with his money? He made good money. What did he do with it? He saved it all. And he would buy gifts for his lord. He liked the praise of this higher up person over him. That was important to him. But he was very harsh and stern with his employees. Skinny as a rake. Thin as a rake, right? Did it say that about him in here somewhere? I didn't know.
Lean as a rake.
Lean as a rake, okay. All right, so now we're going to go on to the Summoner, and this one is going to you're going to like this one. Oh man, he's an interesting dude. There was a Summoner with us who had a fire-red, cherub-like face. He had pus-filled boils with bacterial infection all over his face. His eyes were narrow. He was hot and lecherous as a sparrow. He had black, scabby eyebrows, a thin, scraggly beard. Children were afraid of him when they saw him. No quicksilver or lead ointment or tartar creams or boric or brimstone had ever helped that face of his to clean up his pimples of knobby white or purge the pimples on his cheeks. He loved garlics and onions and leeks and drinking strong wine till all was hazy. I imagine if he loved to eat garlic and onions all the time, he probably smelled as bad as he looked. And if you've ever been around people who eat garlic constantly, the smell comes out through your skin of garlic. I mean, you just have a garlic smell about you when you eat it a lot. And then he would shout and jabber. When he had wine till he was hazy, he would shout and jabber like a crazy man. And he wouldn't speak a word except in Latin when he was drunk. But there were only a few phrases that he knew and that he was good at, so he'd say them over and over because he had learned just these. No wonder, for he heard them every day in his work. And as you know, a man can teach a jay to call out Walter better than the Pope. Okay, so he's saying the guy isn't real bright, but he learned these Latin phrases because he heard them all the time. He wasn't any smarter than a trained parrot. But had you tried to test his wits and grope for more, you'd have found nothing in the bag. Okay, so that's pretty clear. I like that. Not very smart. Then Castillo Cajuris was his tag, and that's one of the Latin phrases, and means what's the point? He was a gentle varlet and kind, no better fellow if you went to find one. He would allow, now this is a little bit tongue-in-cheek, because he said, he was just such a good fellow and so nice. He would allow for just a quart of wine any good lad to keep a concubine. Now he was kind of working with the pardoner, so he was connected with the church. That's why he knew Latin phrases. And he was the one who dispensed the papal pardons. And so he says for just a quart of wine, he wouldn't tell on someone or make him pay if he had a concubine. What a nice guy, right? And a 12-month and dispense it altogether. Yet he could pluck a finch and leave no feather if he found some rascal with a maid. So if he found someone with a girl that he wasn't married to, he could really put the screws on him and get him in trouble with the church, but he would instruct him not to be afraid in such a case of the archdeacon's curse unless the rascal's soul were in his purse. So anybody could get out of being in trouble with him if they just paid him. For in his purse the punishment should be. Purse is the good archdeacon's hell, said he. But well I know he lied in what he said. A curse should put a guilty man in dread, for curses kill as shrivings, when you shrive yourself, or shrivings. Shrive me means to help me get rid of my sins. As shriving brings salvation. So curses kill as shriving brings salvation. So he is saying that if you have to pay me, that's punishment enough. And so he gets people off the hook for many. We should beware of excommunication. Thus, as he pleased, the man could bring duress on any young fellow in the diocese. He knew their secrets. They did what he said. He wore a garland set up on his head, largely as the holly bush on a stake outside an alehouse. Okay, so he wore a garland up on his head, large as a holly bush up on a stake. He had a cake, a round one, which it was his joke to wield as if it were intended for a shield. Okay, so he wore a big garland on his head. They didn't even try a picture of this guy. I mean, with his face all messed up and his big thing on his head and smelling like garlic and scaring children when they look at him. He sounds a little bit, yeah. He sounds to me like he's not very clean. I don't know if that's true because he doesn't really say that. Maybe one of the things that would help his face is if he would bathe it more, even though it says nothing seemed to work on it. But I don't know. I just imagine him having greasy hair, and that's totally supposition. But, you know, if he has a really bad face, he has a problem with oil. And so that's why I think that. I just get a picture of him in my mind that isn't very pretty. But he rode with the pardoner, and this guy is another interesting character. He and the gentle pardoner rode together. Now, the pardoner is the one who really does sell indulgences. This is the kind of guy that Luther got so angry at. I think it was Johann, who was the guy Luther had the big dispute with? Johann Tessel or something like that. He was selling pardons, and this guy was someone who sold pardons. A bird from Charing Cross of the same feather as the Summoner. So he was like the Summoner. He was just back from visiting the court in Rome, and he loudly sang, "Come hither, love, come home." The Summoner sang deep seconds to his song. No trumpet ever sounded half so strong. So the Summoner would sing really loud and sing with the pardoner. The pardoner had hair as yellow as wax, hanging down smoothly like a hank of flax. In driblets fell his locks behind his head, down to his shoulder, which they overspread. Thinly they fell like rat tails, one by one. What makes your hair do that? What makes your hair separate like that?
Oh, grease.
Oil, yeah, greasy, oily hair. Okay, he wore no hood upon his head. For fun, the hood inside his wallet had been stowed. He aimed at riding in the latest mode, but for a little cap his head was bare. He had bulging eyeballs like a rabbit. He sewed a holy relic on his cap. His wallet lay before him on his lap. Brimful of pardons that he'd just gotten from Rome, he had the same small voice as a goat has got. His chin had no beard, and it wouldn't grow a beard. He couldn't grow a beard. He was smoother than ever chin was left by a barber, so he could not grow a beard. I judge he was a gelding or a mare, As to his trade, from Berwick down to Ware, there was no partner of equal grace. For in his trunk he had a pillowcase, which he asserted was Our Lady's veil. He said he had a gobbet of the sail St. Peter had the time when he was made bold to walk on the waves till Jesus took hold of him. He had a cross of metal set with stones, and in a glass a rubble of pig's bones. And with these relics, any time he found some poor-up country person to astonish, on one short day in money down, he drew more than a parson would draw in a month or two. So he would say these pig bones were bones of saints, this pillowcase was the veil of Mary. So he'd sell all these things to people thinking that these things would bless their lives, these poor country folk that didn't know any better. Okay, and he'd make a lot of money. And by his flatteries and prevarications, they give you that as one of your words, prevarication means evasion of the truth. So by his flatteries and evading the truth, he made monkeys of the priest and the congregation. But still, to do him justice, first and last, in church he was a noble ecclesiast. How well he read a lesson or told a story. But best of all, he sang the offertory. Surprise, surprise. His best talent in the church was not telling a story or reading a lesson. It was singing for the offering. For well he knew that when that song was sung, he'd have to preach and tune his honey tongue, and he could do it, and he would win silver from the crowd. So he sang merrily and loud. So getting that money was important. Now, there's something else about this guy. Let's just read on. Now, I've told you shortly the rank, array, and number of the cause of our assembly in this company. So now we are at the Tabard Inn where we're going to meet the host, but we're going to stop right here and do the quiz. This